Hey there, I'm Mark from Spectrum Pulse, and today we're finally going to be talking about the newest album from Remover RevengeSeekerz. Yeah, I know a whole lot of you expected this review a long time ago. Quite frankly, I had been putting it off before the mid-year because more hyperpop adjacent drama was spilling out of the woodwork, and I was trying to avoid getting caught in a blast radius of discourse that I don't have the time to fully contextualize for an artist I've only ever been partially on board with. Suffice to say, when I covered Census Designated back in 2023, with the acknowledgement that its sudden swerve into 90s noise rock and alternative somewhat worked for me, even if it wound up a project that I respected more than I outright liked, that was coming from the context of somebody who was even less on board with the bit-crushed avalanche that came with Frailty in 2021, but I'm also not their fans, where calling Census Designated a little polarizing was a bit of an understatement. So I get the desire to not only go back to that sound, but also scream fuck it and fuck you at the loudest volume possible, stuff their music full of goading callbacks, and hence we have an album that many have called their best so far by a considerable margin. Now, for those of you who know my taste, I think some might be a little surprised that I expressed any interest in reviewing this at all. It's not like I was high on any of their previous music, including the Daria Core stuff, so now adding a healthy dose of rage is probably not going to help. So it might surprise some of you that for once I think the alchemy actually struck something closer to gold, although I still would call this extremely uneven and probably getting overpraised in some quarters and also getting overly dumped upon for some questionable reasons. For starters, I've heard the complaint that this is gentrifying rage music or cultural appropriation. I would be more interested in having some of that conversation about hyperpop as a whole, or many such overly online Gen Z rooted subgenres than just dumping on one convenient target, but I also think it's true that Remover themselves is the part of the album that works the least. Opium imitation aside, even as they bring way more energy on record and a thematic coherence that you will not hear from the majority of that crew, I have never been that much of a fan of that sort of choppy staccato cadence that relies a lot more on the transcendent power of its own ad-libs than most actual bars, most of which is slang that I'm not convinced Remover can really land, and when they still sound so suffocated beneath layers of auto-tune and overwhelming bit-crushed noise, it amplifies this weird glassy-eyed emptiness at the album's core. Now that is intentional thematically. Remover's music has always been an intense conversation with their own experiences and their backlash. So this is the heel turn, I'll give you what you fucking want and own all of it, you can't stop me, throwing themselves headfirst into the heady, hedonistic pop star life and all the fame and nightmare fuel that really comes with it. Which is why a song so painfully glitchy and built for the sweatiest dance party imaginable, like Dancing with Your Eyes Closed, can actually kind of work. They reference Avril Lavigne on the whirring and pummeling clank of Twice Removed, and you know what? That's kind of apt if you remember the bratty transition from Under My Skin to The Best Damn Thing. And as someone who has watched entirely too much stupid online hyperpop melodrama from afar, yeah, some of you absolutely deserve the smoke and rage that this album is throwing amidst all the copycats and the petty jealousy and the rank hypocrisy, especially as Remover hasn't stopped being intensely self-critical along the way. They know the industry eats people alive who play this game, even in more underground spaces like hyperpop, and as a non-binary trans person, their position feels even more perilous and precarious in a scene that eats its own and then treats artists like commodity objects if they succeed, felt all the more acutely in the parties washed with sex, drug addiction, and alienation that paradoxically comes with all of their success. Now this is also not unfamiliar territory. It's really an expansion on a lot of the themes from Census Designated, albeit crystallized and with them able to command a little bit more power and agency, even as it can also leave them desperately desiring an intimacy that might only be properly found away from the spotlight. See the aching, trapped chiptune of Dreamflasher for the stark imagery of everyone and the crowd screaming their name, but if it's not the one they love, how much does it even matter? But circling back to their own sense of self-awareness, by the weedy pileup of the samples on Professional Vengeance, and really that final quarter of this album, you can tell that Jane Remover, they're as much in conversation with their own early music and influence that spurred this spotlight. And the messy contradiction of ripping into what laid the foundation of the success in the first place, all the more difficult because the revenge kind of becomes hollow when the success keeps on coming, no matter how much they try to run from it, an Ouroboros of self-loathing for not living up to this warped mirror of expectations that's ever-changing, both from their own and from the scene that they help spawn. I mean, revenge might taste sweet in a moment, but they understand that it'll turn to ash in their mouth by the very end, which is why this project kind of has to end with the intensely bitter JRJRJR, written on tour with JPEG Mafia. And if you remember JPEG Mafia's own arc of self-destruction on his album last year, that should be no surprise at all, even if for me JRJRJR might be the weakest track on the album. For as hard as it's trying to go, it's never clicked. And yeah, that bitterness makes it a bit of an awkward closer. And as someone who also never fully clicked with Frailty 4 years ago, as much as I can appreciate a holistic exploration of this sense of revenge, without that gripping emotional core to manifest in terms of what they're targeting, the album just doesn't have that same emotional magnetism, even as I can admit this features some of their best melodic composition and production to date. For as much as the mix balance has been frustrating for previous Jane Remover albums, they finally reached a point where the percussion and bass have some impact and texture without swallowing everything, and the blazing blur of samples, revving guitars, and glitch have both the scope and dynamics to feel as huge as they need to be, where their more tuneful side can actually pop, like the broken glass and swaggering George Michael references across Star People, which contorts between trap and downtune alternative, to the blur of fluttery keys amidst the half-pulsating dubstep of Turn Up or Die, from the dejective guitar warping yearning of Fadeoutz to the grainy metallic rave of Psychoboost with a very welcome Danny Brown feature. Not sure it gets away from all the slang they can't pull off, but just saying. And hell, the issue I have with a lot of rage music is that the bass is so shoddily mixed it can only kind of translate live, and Jane Remover managed to walk a lot of that tightrope for me, even if this project absolutely runs long and is stretching its ideas over the overcompressed EDM-inspired dance passages to their ear fatigue reaching breaking point. In short, I get it, feels more like an album I respect more than I like, even if I get more nuggets that have actually stuck with me since I've been listening to this the past couple of months. Your Jane Remover's swirl of heady but emotional hyperpop navel-gazing will be most compelling to those who really like them but only tolerate the larger scene, or can approach it with some level of self-awareness. Where I certainly can handle the latter, Jane Remover themselves, the former, has never really clicked. It's also an album that works best on high-octane adrenaline, where you want to get caught up in that kinetic, rapturous experience in the sweaty pit, rather than think about how much Jane Remover's really explored many of these themes before, and for as much as they want to rip into the scene that they've crafted, well, I come to bury Caesar, not to praise him. Right? Overall, I'm not sure how much use this review will have, especially as I'm months away from this album's release, and those who will want to have heard it will have already done so, and I've watched the backlash cycles come and go multiple times already. But you know, if you want an intensely messy and compelling hyperpop exploration of revenge that is stacked with bangers, you could certainly do a lot worse. I think it's worth hearing. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you want to see more, please be sure to like, share, drop comments, subscribe. I feel like this is an album that prompts a lot of discourse, and I think there's compelling ideas that are not getting a lot of the discourse. It's also intensely confrontational, so it kind of brings a lot of that on itself, and they know it too, so again, I know I'm kind of wading into it months late. I have to hope some of it's died down so the flurry and hellstorm in the comment section isn't that bad, but hey, boost the algorithm, keep arguing, have fun. Beyond that though, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. As y'all want to get involved in helping support the channel, maybe getting albums on my schedule when I reopen it in July, or hell, just yell at me on my Discord, link to my Patreon and YouTube memberships is right over there. Once again, don't feel obligated, tough times, I understand, but the option's available. Till then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.